Hello, it's Brian Whitten here. Welcome to ET Art, and today we're going to discuss what we're looking at here is the megalithic walls that have been built and somewhat unexplained. The technologies used to create such structures are still unexplained. Certainly by the end of the video I will explain to you certainly why every one of those walls is where it is, okay? And I feel I would be 100% correct again in why they're actually where they are on the planet's surface. We also discussed in the last video Göbekli Tepe solved the likelihood. I'll just press play on this, and we saw light and examined light, and we examined the notion that interference in space of a comet or cutting up of a comet has been depicted at microscopic levels on these rocks, because that's what you're seeing before your eyes here. And we saw, as we varied the light and moved it round, that these images presented themselves, which is a story told on the rocks and their manipulation of the meteors in space would appear to be written on the ground at that complex. In our last video we discussed Göbekli Tepe, and we discussed the pillars, the two centre pillars and the two front pillars. If they're pointing off in this direction here, that this will be pointing off either this way or that way in a southerly direction. The reason they're pointing south is to track Nibiru entrance into our inner solar system. I would suggest that the pillars on the outside number more than likely 12, and they are there to point to what, because at this point in time, if you're a planetary scientist and you're looking at these to work out things, which you should be, there's no point pointing at Nibiru without something of really knowing where your planet is in respect to its rotation around the sun. In other words, where it is, whether it's in Leo or wherever. So as far as the star signs are concerned, that is why the outer pillars will probably, I would imagine, have such things, certain animals on them, and Leo and the star signs written on them to indicate where they were at that particular point in time. Also, one of the things that we need to understand by the burying of Göbekli Tepe is that it was buried at the end of a sequence of comet strikes that hadn't actually happened yet. So it would appear, as I portrayed in my last video, to give a whole new meaning to the term preemptive strike. In actual fact, this was built exactly where the comet sequence was going to finish, hundreds of years before the comet sequence actually took place, because this is actually tracking Nibiru's entrance into our inner system, which was actually the deliverer of the comets. I'll go on. The other thing that you would expect to see in the design of these circles and pillars if in actual fact they do, as I suggest, track Nibiru and the other body, which is this one here, I'll just insert that image for you just to remind you of it, that if those images are put onto microscopic, you know, at rocks on microscopic levels, I'm using very, very high technologies to retrieve them, that they were intended to be left there, intended to be found, that these pillars and the angle, the closer it gets, the lesser the work becomes. In other words, the closer that Nibiru system comes to us, that these pillars' angles should change. So in other words, the width that these point at in the sky here, depending on which way they're pointing, I would expect this way. Okay, so south would be down this way here, would be what I would expect. I haven't got, I know we go east-west with our shadows, but it doesn't say anywhere here south. I am assuming from what I expect from this design is that they're pointing this way. Okay, you'll note this one's over here pointing down this way. See the different angle here? And what you'll find is that the pillars around here that they represent will be different pillars. So it just means that we were in a different place. They were recording Nibiru at a different time. We must remember that the travel of Nibiru, as indicated in the pyramid layout, puts its travel in excess, its visibility in our inner system in excess of 1200 years at least. I want to show you another thing. We are now looking at an aerial view of those megalithic walls. Okay, I will tell you by the end of this video what every one of those walls means and what it does. Certainly the main ones. I'm certainly not talking about if there's any, I would expect there be pertinent archaeology in here and geology that would be pertinent as well, but I'm not going to discuss this bit here. I can't even see that. We're going to discuss all of these walls here, these ones here, and all of these walls back here, and those three red, or there's two red lines there. I will tell you what they are as well a little bit towards the end. First of all, I would like to show you this. We are looking at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. I want to pan out now and I'll just show you where that is on the globe, and like I said, we had discussed in the last video that its placement had been put at the end of a comet sequence that hadn't actually begun for many hundreds of years, and that's in actual fact where it is in actual fact at the end of what is the end of the comet sequence here. So it wasn't far off, and Cairo of course is at the end of the comet sequence as well. So that's why those buildings are there, by the way. If we then look at where Göbekli Tepe is, it is at the end of a sequence that was not due to start. That is not by coincidence. Not by coincidence at all. It has been placed here with foreknowledge of where these comets were, number one, going to start, and number two, going to end. Okay, now you could doubt that. The fact it's buried would indicate that it was in a location they knew was going to be damaged, so it was buried. It tracked Nibiru, and I suspect the other black planet that I'll insert. I've inserted that image for you already. We must then go back to analyse where the comet sequence were. For those that weren't watching, I'll now zoom out and we'll look at all 7 comet sites again very quickly. We will go around here to the first one, which is the first to actually hit the planet was the southern one here. The second one was here. The southern one broke into 4 bits, as we discussed with this rock here. And those 4 comets then came over and landed above Australia. I'll just turn on that other app whilst you're looking at that. And those 4 comet sites hitting in Australia being here, here, here and here. The other comet in the northern hemisphere, which came from Central America, then came across here from Central America and landed. I initially and have been putting in my videos that it landed here. That's been, I was incorrect. Actually, where it landed is here. Okay. I would say it's landed here and actually created a greater part of the Mediterranean. I thought it only extended it by 1800 k's or so, with some more information that I've got off the rocks, and probably the structure we're about to look at has actually told me that that's not actually the case. The landing site is more where the orange indication is here. That's where I'm now beginning to think that this comet came here and it actually broke up, and you'll probably find that there's parts of this comet all the way through here. There's a big chunk of something in here as well. I thought it in actual fact started here. So I think you'll understand why once I've discussed the other building and the walls and what they're pointing to. We then leave the Mediterranean and return back to Cusco in Peru to see where its location is on the globe. Okay, and when we go there, just exactly where is its location? If in actual fact the location of Göbekli Tepe is in actual fact at the end of the comet sequence, exactly where is this structure in respect to the 2 first comets and the location that they struck the globe? We need to pan out to understand where that is. So if I pan out, you will find that if we head north, we are actually in the very center of the northern impact and at the very start of the southern impact. Okay, so I think the placement of the structure in the very beginning would be one that shows the very same thing, in that it is placed prior, if in actual fact it shows a design feature that shows that it is looking at something prior to the impact. Well, then it too is showing design features that show, as the image on the rock showed, that we're chopping up this comet and we're going to put it where we want it to land. Okay, because I mean, if we see that the very same thing built into this structure, that it is recording the approach of the things that tilted the globe, and it is at the very start now, in the very center of the very northern comet and the very start of the southern comet. Well, then we must assess the very 7 comets. And remember that we are seeing 7 comets displayed on the planet's surface. the 7 locations that are both shown at microscopic level. If you've gone back and watched my Göbekli Tepe video, you will see on the rock where it is displaying the Australian impacts that happen above Australia and separate the Australian continent. There are 4 impacts there, but that is displayed as one impact. Now we're going to look at this wall layout and I will show you how it works. Now, remembering that the 4 comets that hit above Australia are recorded as one impact, both here, and which is what these first 4 walls do. They indicate, as the Sacsayhumain does, the 4 comet impacts. They're recorded as 4 impacts. First of all, we'll look at the wall most to the right side, and I want you to notice that we are seeing, as we're seeing in the Sacsayhumain, this wall being here, being the thrust of, and the up here, right? So the up and thrust caused by the first comet. We also show, I'm going to just zoom in a little bit here and zoom into the bottom part of this wall, and I hate when Google Earth does this and changes the angle and aspect. There's a link here. This is a link wall to tell you that this happened and this happened, as it does in the Sacsayhumain at exactly the same point in time. You will also notice that there's a notch in this wall here. That notch is telling you that this one here is reflective of the Southern Ocean impact, the one that separates, which is why it's down the south end of this wall, separates the continent of South America from the Antarctica. The second wall, if we go up and look at it closer now, the other part at the top here says that the comet has knocked the axis back this way. Okay, it is in the northern hemisphere. This is the one that's the same time as this one, so in other words, this is the Central American comet impact that it's displaying. That's why it's linked like this, just like it is in the Sacsayhumain. They are on the same line in the Sacsayhumain. Okay, that's why that is on that way. So it's showing you that this one moved at the same time, the axis back this way, as this one moved it that way. Okay, so which is exactly what the Sacsayhumain indicates. The next 2 walls are showing us where the axis was moved. So this one is saying I was whacked again in the northern hemisphere. I have moved the axis the opposite direction than this one did. The next wall shows the major here. This is where I'd say this is, and I think there's something chopped out of this one here, and this is saying that when the next comet impact tilted the axis this way again, but only a little bit. Okay, and that might be showing us it was down in the southern hemisphere again, because it's chopped out of here. Okay, but that's exactly what they're doing, and this 4 lines here are telling you the axis of the Earth and how it was affected by the individual comet impacts, which is that 4 lines there. Now I'm going to discuss these 2 lines here. What I also want you to note with these last 2 comet impacts, this one is the one that where it's showing the Australian, which is right here in the bottom part here. This is the Australian impact here. This is what happens with the tilt of the axis, right? So in other words, it's moved this way a little bit, but this is up closer to the mass of the planet and closer to the equator. So that's what happens with this one here. As you can see, these 2 here at the top of the wall, they both point to what would appear to be a pyramid shape. Okay, I just wanted you to be aware of that. That does look like a pyramid shape here, and it's pointing both these lines here to the pyramid. Okay. Also want you to make note that there's a notch right here, which is where the pyramid is, and from that point we are now seeing 3 walls created where we had only 2. Now, having discussed all 4 walls and the last 2 pointing at a pyramid, I want to just go away from there just for a second to bring to your attention the manner in which the rocks have been placed at the site. Okay, now I'm going to zoom in, and I'll probably have to make a few adjustments here, but where I want to go in is first of all here. Okay, and we'll have a look at what we actually see in this corner. I really do hate that program when it does that. Why the hell it can't just keep the aspect, I don't know. Right here, and what we're seeing here is the story of the comets itself. Okay, we are seeing the 2 bodies. One of them's even marked red. By the look of that, it's actually, this is what we're seeing here. And we are then seeing one comet here, or one comet here, turn into 2. And then the layout, we are seeing what actually happened to the comet. So in other words, the big one, as I displayed on my microscopic view of that rock, I will insert that view here for you to have a look at. You can see that it marks the bottom or southern impact, which is the one we are now looking at. We are looking at the first 2 walls, indicating the first and second impact being hit at the same time. We have been on this one, on the rock, indicating that there's 4 written there in Roman numerals, as you can see. And when you go in here, that's exactly what you're seeing here. You're seeing the creation of 4 other rocks around this big rock. So it's telling you here how many comets are made off each one of these impacts. And I noticed this as I was going through these walls, and then realized what I was seeing with these rocks was in actual fact that you've got Nibiru in the grey body here that is depicted in the inserted picture that I'll show you now. So it would appear at microscopic level, and then we go back to the site here. That is what we're seeing here. And then we're seeing one big comet turn into 2, and a little one possibly that went off on its own. Like I said, there is one that flies off and lands in Australia, remember that? The one in the northern hemisphere that hits in Central America, which is the second impact here, is shown as breaking into 3 comets there. Okay, and it's saying that they then went on, 2 of which landed in the same place, one would expect, and the other one breaking and going over that way. So we're looking at this being the impact that created the Mediterranean. Note that that is an arrow pointing there. I'll show you why that's there. So we're seeing a reflection of exactly the comets and what happened to them here. Okay, now we'll discuss these 2 walls. Okay, we now discuss the last 2 walls in this complex, or at least in this line of 6 walls. These 2 are in actual fact tracking Nibiru and the other grey planet, as displayed in this still image before, and as displayed in this complex. As I said, those 2 mounds are displaying exactly that. One thing I want to show you now is, if you're probably wondering, okay, well, how do you line them up? This is probably the easiest way, like that. Okay, so if I'm wondering where Nibiru was in the sky, it's pointing in this direction here. If you were using any of these lines or the pillars at if you were using the pillars at Göbekli Tepe, you would have to calculate that the planet was standing straight whilst all this is happening here. okay, because that's what's happening. And the planet was standing straight when this is happening up here as well, and I'll discuss that in a minute. I wanted to draw your attention, if I could, I'll move this over to this pyramid here, because I want to discuss with you and insert here a view on a microscopic rock. Okay, so a rock, my pancake rock, which is this rock here. Now I've just got that microscopic view back up again, where I said to you it looked to me like there had been some interference here. And I said, I don't know what this is here, but it looked to me like this was Nibiru, or at least a view that I thought was Nibiru, or a depiction of it, and that it looked like it had made, you know, a comet fly off here and go over to what I thought had been a depiction of the, you know, Great Australian Bight and Port Augusta and whatnot, and it had a question mark here telling me to look at this spot here. Okay, we then discussed this comet impact site, which was in the outback of Australia, exactly where it was indicated on the rock, as you can see. There's Australia, and there was our rock again. So if in actual fact the situation is that this is a depiction of that comet impact site, well, that's one comet, and the other two depicted as flying off here, one in this direction and one in this direction. So there were three objects created from the point of whatever this point is here, you know, whatever that is. I mean, like I said, this is the same rock that did depict that this southern impact here, as just in this corner, that it broke into four, and that it was the southern impact at the bottom of South America that created four, that separated the Australian continent. So this is where this story is coming from. Now I'm going to go back from this view. Now we are looking at the very same spot on the complex that reflects what was on that microscopic view on the rock. Okay, so we are looking at the creation here of three comets. Now if we look at where these walls begin, we are looking at one wall beginning from here, and we know that one of these is tracked Nibiru, the other one is tracked the Black Planet. We are seeing one of them come from one source, but we are looking at the other two comets come from another source. That's what this is saying here. If we look and understand what these walls mean, that's what they mean. The same scenario for the tracking of the comets must apply, which is why we're seeing these walls move in the angle and direction they do. They are no longer tracking Nibiru any longer. They are tracking what was created by the pass of Nibiru and its other body that rotates around it. And the location of the comets in the sky as they made their way to the planet is worked out exactly the same way, in that each comet, to find out where it was in the sky, is like this. Now remember, the calculations for this, if you're using these sorts of things and you're a planetary scientist, because I'm going to put this video and make the planetary scientists aware again at the Sydney Uni. I can understand why they haven't gotten back to me, to be quite frank. This is pretty monumental, astronomical in breakthrough in the true sense of the word. One thing I want to bring to your attention is the two walls that are being created by the, or getting shown that they're getting created here by, and I look at this looking at, this is not a natural body, but there are certainly two of them being generated from something that doesn't look natural to me. I mean, if we're looking at that being a pyramid, and it's got certainly a triangular shape at the front of it there. I haven't been to this site, but it certainly looks to me to be that's representing, like I said, as we see in the microscopic view on the rock when we see the white triangle come up behind the meteorites and cut them up and steer them. That's what's going on here. This is what's happening. So now, with one mystery solved, we do ask more questions. But I want to, like I said, bring your attention to the latter two walls. I think what we're seeing here is it looks like some of the walls are incomplete or whatever. I think what you're seeing there is not necessarily damaged walls or anything. I think you're seeing the lines cross over of both these two comets here. Okay, so if this comet, it started out its line here like this, right, and got to there, and so on with this one, but you can see its line has already started to go that way. So I think you're not seeing a wall destroyed here, you're just merely seeing the walls cross over. So in other words, what started out at this angle here is now this one over here, okay, and vice versa. This one here is now this one down here, okay. So then we're seeing these get tracked, these two comets, all the way through here. Note that there is a change there. I will come back to that in a minute, because as much as what I might have showed you already is quite astounding, we haven't actually got to the astounding part yet, believe it or not. But what you're actually seeing here is the tracking of those three comets. We are now looking at the end of those three walls that have been generated from, as I believe, the interference in space. It would appear that two of these comets have come from one location and one come from another. On this diagram here, or when I say, well, it is a diagram, technically they're buildings and diagrams depending on where you're looking at them from. What we're seeing here is them building walls, and if it's humans, they're building walls with the complexity that we see when I insert this here in this image. We are looking at people building walls with this complexity when there are three massive, if they've got the complexity, if they've got the ability to build the walls, well, they've got more than likely the complexity to know full well how big these comets are. Understand that that's what we're seeing here. This is really, really quite an amazing thing. We are looking at, if it is humans with an advanced technology, and it does show that on the rocks. I've told you that it shows an advanced technology with people with lights, lit cities. We have gone through that in the last video. We are now looking at a situation where the people are actually building these walls, if it's humans, and whether it be with the help of aliens or not, I don't know. I wasn't there. I can tell you that that is what these walls are doing. I want to bring your attention to one or two things here. Now you'll note where I've just zoomed in just a tad, just to give you a little bit better, idea of what I'm proposing here. Where we're going to stop building this wall is right here, where there's a break in this wall. I would guess that was built that way, and which says we stopped here. This is where we stopped building all of these walls, and like I said, for him to have built like this, it was really quite amazing. But following the analogy, we can now work out which of these walls was tracking what comet, okay, because we can tell what angle they were pointing at, okay. So if we look at the last available angle, okay, as to what was going where. Okay, we look at the last peak and the last trough. So this one, if we put so this one coming along this way, we put that in there, that is its last angle. Alright, so it is north. Okay, the middle wall, its angle is there. Okay, the bottom wall, its angle is down here, and then it looks like it's getting here. So what we're looking at here is this is going to be the one that creates the Mediterranean. Okay, because we are on us, well yeah, it does, it creates the Mediterranean. It also is the one that severs the North American continent almost from the South American continent. This one, because of its shallower angle, is the one that lands in the middle of Western Australia. This one is the one that severs Antarctica. It is the most southerly of these two angles at its last. So its last angle here is this one, and that one's up there, so it's a shallower angle, and that is the one. So these two, the one that lands in Western Australia and the ones that tip the globe, are generated from the pyramid. Okay, this one, which is the one that lands in the northern hemisphere, it says is generated from the Nibiru. Okay, because one says, if you go back to the start of the wall, I will come back to tell you why this is here in a minute. Okay, but we've tracked 3 walls here. Like I said, they cross over here only because of the angles. It's not because any walls have been destroyed there. They cross over purely because the comets change position in the sky. Okay, that's exactly why that is there. And now we're going to back out and discuss something that is really quite truly amazing about this complex. I brought you back to a part in the wall that I said I would cover later on. We must ponder now whether or not we live in a society that would in actual fact persist in building a wall when in actual fact it knew what it saw coming. You know, I mean, obviously we are looking at a very advanced civilization if in actual fact we are looking at humans, and as depicted in the rocks, we are looking at lit cities when these things hit home. You would have to look at also how long we're talking at building this wall. I mean, this is what is another mystery. We answer a question, but with a question becomes another mystery. Look, put it this way, technically speaking, if these walls were built by aliens, which I suspect they probably were, more than, you know, or certainly with humans maybe helping in advanced, you know, obviously like I said, if this situation going down and Nibiru is in the sky and the comets are on their way to the planet, E.T. would come and help, right? But he knows full well where they're going to land because he's landing them. So this is what's going down here. I don't know, you can assess what you think of that. I'm going to show you that this kink in the wall here at this point, only purely and simply by the placement and knowing how these bodies in space are lined up. I will look at the first line first. Okay, so this first comet is still at that line, so its placement in the sky hasn't really changed. Okay, so there's nothing really happening to the planet here. Okay, if I look at the middle one, oops, I'm sorry, I'm just hoping you line up. You know, you can see that the coaster is lining up, this line across the top of the coaster. If I go from there to there, So the planet hasn't done anything here. So what we're looking at here, just like they do at microscopic level, it's an arrow. It says look up. It says look up twice. You know, it's important. And as mysterious as that may appear, and as it may appear we are looking at something and that is mind-blowing, we still haven't got to that point until right now. I will show you the next thing. We will zoom out and we will cover at this point what that arrow is pointing at, and you will note that I had drawn these lines here, and I'll zoom right out now to give you an indication of what you're actually seeing. Okay, because what you're actually seeing there is exactly what I showed you in the video or in the picture yesterday, which I will show you now. And that was this image I showed you that in the last video, is the creation of the Mediterranean itself. And the image that you see above the wall as a landscape is ratio to how big the Mediterranean was before the comet hit it. Now I'm going to zoom back out again so that you can see that it is depicting the comets coming in here. It's not, you know, this is not by chance. This is a sweeping body. Its movement here is downward and at. This movement here is which way? I'm coming in this way, and I'm going here to create the Mediterranean, and that is exactly what you're seeing depicted here. A gouge right through here all the way to the Nile. And like I said, this rock here is particularly unbelievable. It's split in a manner, if you can see that there, as to form Lake Victoria and the Nile River, it would appear. And this is where the rock cracked on its own. It was a rock that was really, really mysterious. It seemed to just crack to form this here. And whether this was the route the Nile used to take prior, because we all know it doesn't flow this way. It flows up this way and out into the Mediterranean. So whether or not we are looking at a part of that comet coming up here and actually being the very thing that changes the Nile so that it ran this way and into the Mediterranean. And remember that in actual fact Cairo complex is in actual fact right at the very end of this meteorite impact. It is right underneath here where the river was diverted to. And remember that up here, okay, north of this complex, it almost looks like it's been marked here with this little odd mark we're seeing here. We're seeing north of this complex is where our Göbekli Tepe is, right there. So I'll just go back out of that image now and I'll show you one other thing. Now I'm just back to the aerial view of what I perceive and what I believe to be a representation of what is the Mediterranean prior to the impact, okay? Which is why the arrows are in the wall to look here. The lines, I don't want to sit here and baffle with people with maths and distances and whatnot. Probably the easiest way is for me to zoom in a little to just show you I have in actual fact put a line of measurement here and a line of measurement there, and I divided this measurement into that measurement, and it worked out to be about 3.12. It was a little more, but I could have varied the angle. You basically got the rough idea of what I'm talking about, okay? I want to go from there to the Mediterranean and we'll have a look at that. Now you can see I've just got Europe on the map now in the Mediterranean, and I wanted to zoom in, remembering what we just said, roughly 3.12 or thereabouts, 3 times the width was the length of the Mediterranean. Okay, so what I want to zoom in here underneath here and go to the here. Okay, and if I measure the width of that and then multiply it by 3.12, which is what that diagram is saying, it says I end up being about here, right where all this has gone. and I initially thought we were looking at possibly this meteorite landing here. Okay, but what we're actually seeing here is would be multiple strikes in this area, as depicted in the layout just here. This is where the landing is that creates a Mediterranean, so we're looking at 2 decent sized meteors here, and I would expect more than likely this one here, there's going to be other ones in here somewhere, like other ones that haven't been dug up, that show you the impact in a little bit more detail than what we're seeing. Or maybe there's some in here. There looks like there's some rocks there that could be dug up that would show you 1, 3, 3, and one bigger one, which would be what was created from here, because we can see that there's already 4 being created and generated there, which is the number we are seeing associated with that. I don't get a lot of references at a microscopic level. Other than this one, I thought this just stayed where it hit initially, but I think what happened, it sort of said it stayed together, and I've always read it as being stayed together until until I look at this, what we're looking at now, because I'm not looking at something that stayed together here. What I'm looking at is something that landed in the same place, and that might be why that is differently always displayed as differently, because the other comet, the southern, this one down here that separated the Australian continent, it broke into 4. It was also a massive, like I said, this was in excess of 700 or 800 kilometres wide, this thing. It broke into 4 separate comets, all of which were over 200 kilometres wide. All have had their own separate impact site, so I think that's why that's always been specified as being 4. Okay, whereas this had, albeit it was more than 1 comet, this is the first depiction I've ever seen it being more than 1. It's always been 1. So now I'm seeing, what I'm seeing is more, is not so much 1, it's that it only had the 1 landing place. Okay, and like I said, if we look at these 2 walls here, this one here, okay, which is this comet, which is the one that lands in the Mediterranean, it is pointing to this as well. Okay, so, and as is this one here, right, which is the one that severs Australia. Okay, so really it's saying a majority of them, the only one that really wasn't generated by this, as opposed to these 2, was the one on the top, which is in actual fact the one that, yeah, this one here. So as I'll back out again, I'll show you exactly what we're seeing is exactly that. It's a representation of what the Mediterranean used to look like before the comet hit it. So if there was ever any doubt that these complexes weren't placed where they were with the intent of the builder to land the very comets where they did, would be a pretty silly assessment, especially when we are seeing so much evidence of exactly that. Well, I've had people say, Brian, how do you manage to get the information off the rocks and move the light so gently, because I do. If I hold that up like that, you will see what it is Nerves of steel. Nerves of steel. You've got to actually, it's not up and down like this or anything like that. Some of these images are from there to there, there, there. So you've got to have really good nerves. My biggest problem is I drive the mouse with this hand. All jokes aside, some serious thought has to go into some recent discoveries that I may have made and some others may have known about. We've now come to a point where we must sit and assess what it is we've actually learnt today, because we have actually learnt quite a lot. We've learnt that there are 3 structures on our planet that show certainly that they have tracked a planet or body that seems to come from the south, that we would suspect, if they're going to put it on the rocks at a microscopic level, that Nibiru and another body that rotates around Nibiru is in actual fact very, very real. To then assess that what we're looking at here, and as depicted on the rocks, we are talking about an advanced civilization with lights and lit cities and whatnot, as I displayed in the last video I put up about Göbekli Tepe. We must look at, see that whether or not we need to understand whether we're going to see the human race, understanding what we're like in an advanced civilization with power and the ability to, traverse the skies, or, and go from country to country and have a worldwide, whether we're going to sit here or whether there's a civilization on the planet that is going to sit here and build this structure. Okay, because that's a question we must ask ourselves. Like I said, I will answer many, many questions about this structure here today, but we will ask and develop and create a few more questions in doing so. I just want to go back to Göbekli Tepe for a minute. I'll show you. We must go back to Göbekli Tepe to understand what is going on here. We are seeing, I would expect, Nibiru tracked for many, many hundreds of years by what was a civilization that I would expect was the one chosen to given levels of advancement. Okay, I'm not saying there were not other races. How we all got put back where we were, 12,000 years ago, this complex, all these 3 complexes would undoubtedly be linked and telling us what happened to our planet a little over 12,000 years ago. And it was catastrophic by every stretch of the imagination, to the point where I cannot see anything walking, living. That is pretty much the reality. These movements of the planet in such a fast motion of fast speed must have made tidal waves absolutely monstrous, huge tidal waves, and the movement up and down of the planet just impossible to survive. We must assess that in actual fact is the case, and that it's happened before. Maybe not in the same manner and recorded, but we must assess then if we've got a civilization here at this area. We won't know until we've dug all of this, the constructions here out, whether or not we are looking at the centre pillars pointing at Nibiru, while it's 100 years away, or 200 years away, or 300 years away, or whatever. I think if we were looking at a human nature being the way human nature is, we've got to look at the situation here that maybe what we see here is a civilization that was given as we have. We look at how far we've advanced in a couple of 100 years. You only got to look at a civilization like this that would develop these, and we know that the latter ones are nowhere near as good. The time hasn't been spent building them. I did say that would be because it was getting closer and closer, Now we are seeing more what we would expect from human nature, in that when we get closer to the event, maybe the workmanship drops off, it stops altogether, they're advanced, they're further up the road, they don't care about humanity. This is more of the belief to me of what I would expect from humanity, right? So I would expect that when you dig the most recent of these out, you would still be a couple of 100 years away from the event. Okay, now the reason I say that is the following. We've just pulled Europe back up as we know it today, and if I can get you to imagine, if you could, what we have just looked at would indicate all of this from about that point onwards, all the way through, has been created by a comet impact in Europe. And I've suggested where Göbekli Tepe is, which is up here north of the end point, that is an actual fact telling us we've got a situation here where that placement of that structure is one that showed intent. And that's not necessarily the case. I mean, if we're going to analyse something, we've got to analyse with and understand human nature, really. That's what you've got to do. That's why I wanted to show you that wall and understand that if we're to believe that wall was built by humans, even with humans, whether it was aliens' help or whether whatever, you've got to understand getting humans to sit there and build that whilst they knew it was their last days of their life seems a little bit of a stretch to me. Where we look at the placement of Göbekli Tepe here, if it isn't one driven by inevitability, it'd be where it would be. So in other words, its placement is driven by the inevitability of human nature. Okay, and what I'm saying by that is what we have just experienced and what we've just learned happened 12,000 years ago. There is very few things, if anything, and I mean anything, living on a ground anywhere that's going to live. Okay, because these comets are huge, the motion of the planet huge, tidal waves huge. It has totally decimated what is made out to be a populated, populated area. Okay, where it makes out these comets hit here, it makes out to be a very populated area. Okay, now I'm going to suggest something here, and this is a suggestion, but one we must come to terms with and understanding what we're seeing. Human nature would have this comet land here because of human nature, right? If it is an actual fact that Göbekli Tepe is an actual fact, an effort, whether it be done directly or indirectly by the aliens to educate humans to a point of what they had coming at them and educate them, because remember, we are looking at this thing for 3,000 years. Its cycle in the inner solar system is 3,000 years. Okay, that's a long time. So from the time that you were teaching people how to build what was getting built at Göbekli Tepe, we could have passed 1,000 years, and we've seen what we've done in a couple of hundred. So it's not inevitable to think that it just fell by the wayside. They didn't care, and they covered it up themselves, like the leaders, the kings and queens that are depicted on the rocks as having, I can tell you now, there are kings and queens looking up at comets coming down on them on the rocks, just as much as there are kings and queens in the odd rock looking down at the catastrophe that bestowed us 12,000 years ago. I'm talking about the one prior. So in other words, we are talking about the Mediterranean not being here, and a race of people on this planet chosen to educate and extend beyond others. Okay, so in other words, the aliens have come in, like I said, either directly or indirectly to educate. And what happened is that they educated, they made a decision. Their decision was to bring peril to every other race on the planet, because as far as they could see, they didn't care. They weren't going to be here in 50 or 100 years. This is human nature, because that's what we're seeing right now, and it is really quite amazing that we falter time and time again. Now I'll show you one other thing. Once you have looked and assessed and properly dug the remains of Göbekli Tepe, you would have to then assess, like I said, how far away the angles were, how far away everything was. But we come back to this side, and then we must assess then, are we then ready to believe that humankind or mankind in any part of the planet would in actual fact aid and assist in the construction of a wall like this, knowing that they were going to be dead before they finished, or when they finished the end of it, because when they get to the end of this wall, that is the day that mankind is swept off the planet as they know. If we're looking about an advanced world, that's what we've got to look at here. They couldn't have come down and built this wall, without the other people in Europe knowing. You would think, if in actual fact it's a very advanced world, it is certainly portrayed that way by the aliens on their rocks, because like I said, the technology on the rocks that I'm looking at under a microscope make this thing look like a jigsaw puzzle from Woolworths for $10. I'm not kidding. The technology at microscopic level on the rocks, etched, laser etched, wood fibre optic inserts, and some of the imagery and the manner in which it's obtained is amazing. Listen, we've got to then assess, is this going to be built by humans? But there's one part of this I will show you. I just wanted to go back to an aerial view here, just to bring your attention first to these two walls here, which in actual fact are tracking Nibiru and the other planet, whatever its name is, the black planet. You would need, as a planetary scientist, to know how long that tracked Nibiru for, as opposed to Göbekli Tepe. Okay, that's what you would need to do. That's why I said to you, you need to undo that. I'll be honest with you, this complex here, I do not see it being built with human knowledge or involvement, to be honest. I would perceive this being built without any help at all. It is possible, however, that it was, okay, and that in actual fact the race of people on this country or continent were in actual fact one of the many that were being persecuted by those that they educated with more education up in that Cusco area, well, not Cusco area, in the European area, many hundreds of years beforehand, which is why I said it's necessary to know how long this is, how long that actually is there, because if you reflect that and put that as a reflection of the attempted education of the people in Europe, that's what we must assess. We need to know the distance in time there. So that's why I said I would tend to think that what we're seeing here is not built by humans. It is possible that they came and educated a race of people that were persecuted. I tend to think that that actually could be the case, because as you remember, we've got to go back and look at this image here we've seen the image, I should say, or we've got to go back and assess the image that we've already seen of the human sacrifice. And these walls are being built all the way down here to, you know, the demise of our planet here. That's what you're seeing here. You're seeing the 3 comets. Cannot see humans building that all the way to the end. Yet on the other hand, we could see exactly that, you know, a race of people that were being persecuted, that were protected, and that because they were protected, they were stood by. And not only were they stood by, they were, you know, saved. And how that saved process goes in, I'm not going to go into that in this video because it is rather a daunting thing. We've already covered a fair bit that's rather daunting, so I'll leave you to think about that, and I will think about it too, because I wasn't quite sure how to finish this video. It's a daunting thing. I would tend to think, like I said, that where I have stated the comets were guided there many hundreds of years beforehand, not necessarily so. I mean, really, the outcome of where they land could be an outcome of human nature, and that would be probably more inclined to think that. And I think that because of the number of rocks at my feet that have the story on them, that is truthful. And when I say is truthful, the planet shows that it's truthful. I don't see that I have a threat from ET unless I'm a bad man, you know. He does portray on the rocks a very civilized world when this happens, and when this did happen, it was a very civilized planet. It does show on the rocks, you know, people sitting down watching TV, and a very similar lifestyle to what we have now. Not one that I think for a minute is depicting a futuristic event. The ones on the rocks that I'm looking at are a past event. We are looking at a very civilized planet, and one that I'm sure, if you can imagine what happened to Japan, those waves are only 30 meters high, not 100 plus, because that is in actual fact what has swept across the continents that we live on, especially Australia and Africa. They copped it big time. Now the other reason why I have assessed that this be the situation, okay, that leading up and after these comets, the one image that you saw, which is this image. Now I've just got that image up on the screen from the 9 from 9 video, and I bring your attention to this. The 9 from 9 video, and this stone in the story behind this whole story here says, this is why we steered the comets. And like I said, the location of them, it would be hard to dispute that the comets, they have not actually deliberately put them in a situation where they've separated the land masses. So they have in actual fact protected certain people from other people. Like I said, I won't discuss where we all went in the meantime, because quite frankly, you planetary scientists put this through, you will find that there is nothing living on the planet, I'm certain. This is why, absolutely why, there may have been somebody help build the walls in Peru. Okay, the humans that were in Peru could have been victimized in this manner, as I'm sure they did. Remember that this rock here was found in Australia at Halliday's Point. Okay, and by no means do I mean that the Aboriginal were into this sort of thing at all. I'm saying that in this video purely and simply because I did find this on an Australian beach at Halliday's Point, and I can assure you from the images that I've seen, I do not see this being something that the Aboriginals did to each other or whatever. Quite the opposite actually. There is one image that I have, and it's the only image that I have, where the obvious view of a UFO in the sky is met with the glee and smile and absolute rejoice of an Australian Aboriginal woman. So I actually wanted to put that in this video for you to understand that that's an actual fact the case. And if this happened 12,000 years ago, she was glad, very, very glad to see the UFOs in the sky. I would have absolutely no doubt that she knew why they were there to help, and that would mean that they have been probably in a situation where they've needed help again. So that would indicate that to me. I'll move on. So now we finish our assessment and we ponder as to whether there was any human help in the manufacture of these walls. They are certainly megalithic. I will bring your attention just to this rock over here. Ironic that that one on the corner of this photo had these marks on it and 2 marks down here. I thought there are, I've noticed quite a few rocks in these walls that are quite amusing, figures and whatnot. Listen, that's what we assess. Do we assess that there are people here that are we looking at humans helping? I'm not 100% sure we were helping building this. I sort of tend to think if we were, it certainly didn't track Nibiru very long, and we've still got to believe that there are people on the planet that were happy and willing, and like I said, to build to the end. I would suspect there were, and they would have been the people that were persecuted, and like I said, the landing of the comets where they were, as predictive as I might have made out to be, the prediction or the predictive element there, I mean, they knew ahead of time and they could have known ahead of time and well and truly could have put it there, but it also could have been one driven by human nature. We must not forget that. Well, that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. That's bye from Brian Whitten and ET Art. Thanks very much. Bye bye.